A typical good year for film usually has probably one film that's remembered as a very truly and great film. And, a below average year has a few decent ones, but none that are going to be remembered in the future. 1994 was interesting because it had three hugely successful and, you know, even today they're still relevant and famous films. Those are Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption, and Forrest Gump. And of course, there was a lot of debate on who the Oscar should go to. And at the end of the day, Forrest Gump won Best Picture. Now, this has actually gone down as one of the worst Best Picture winners ever, just solely for the reason that it won over Shawshank and Pulp Fiction. Now, just because a certain movie doesn't win over another one, does that mean it's really a bad choice? Not necessarily. Though I do think that The Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction are both more than deserving of the Oscar. I think that Forrest Gump is also, and I'm going to break down why in my review. For all two of you who don't know the story of Forrest Gump, it's basically about a kid who grows into a man named Forrest Gump. And throughout his growth, I suppose you could say, he gets to live through several key events in the 20th century. It starts around the 50s when he teaches Elvis to dance, and then it moves on when he plays for the University of Alabama in the 1960s. And he, as you see on the screen now, it's a civil rights. No, it's a hippie rally, I think. Yeah, and he also, of course, is in Vietnam, which is probably the most memorable of the major events he is in. And I don't know, I guess it's just that he's dim-witted and not very smart, and yet he's a significant player, I guess you'd say, in these events that makes it such a heartwarming film. And while I do like the character of Forrest Gump, I can't even say that. I think it's pretty freaking awesome. I was going to give you a reason why it's not as cool as people make it out to be, but I think it's pretty cool. I mean, the character is very likable, and while he's not the smartest of people, he's still able to, get through all these interesting times and leave an impact. And, around the time this movie was made, of course, these events were much more relevant than they are now, anyway. Although I don't think the movie's hurt that much by it. I think the events are still quite relevant. And the effects, though, are incredible. Like, if you're just seeing the picture of the rally there, I mean, that's real. Like, that's real footage. He, does all kinds of interesting stuff throughout the movie where they put Forrest Gump with this footage, and it matches almost perfectly. Alright, so there are three major character stories going on in Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump's story is what I just said. It's the main story. He goes through all these events, and while being very innocent about it, he still makes a big impact on them. Now, the character of Jenny's story is much more complex to me. You see, she met Forrest when she was younger, and they were best friends. And, she had a rough childhood, though, because she was molested by her father, and, that just set off a string of, tough times for Jenny. And Forrest was always, he always loved her, he always cared for her, he wanted to basically marry her, essentially. And you see, but while Forrest was embarking on all these quote-unquote noble, events of the 20th century, Jenny was not. She was doing the opposite. She was participating in drugs, she was a hippie, and she also was frequently being abused by other people. Sort of, opposite to what was going on with Forrest, because he was being, making friends with a lot of other people. And the way to look at that is that Forrest had a nice childhood, so, he lived a nice life. She had a rough childhood, and now her life is rough. So I find that a very interesting contrast. But Forrest still loves Jenny, of course, no matter what. But Jenny does not want to be with Forrest, not because she doesn't like him necessarily, but because she feels like Forrest is too good for her, because she knows that she is not a good person. And she may strive to be a good person, but past events just continue leading her down the wrong path. And due to this, she feels like she's kind of crossed a point of no return, and she continues to live her life, as basically a victim of all this abuse. And she continues to pick the wrong choices, while Forrest continues to make good choices. And then there's Lieutenant Dan. Alright, I love this guy. He is by far my favorite character in this movie. We first meet Lieutenant Dan when Forrest is not even drafted. He signs up for Vietnam to serve in the military because he thinks it'll be fun or something. And of course, he meets Baba, and they become friends. But Lieutenant Dan is also there, and he's over Forrest and Bubba's unit. And the thing about him is, he has had at least one family member die in every single past war they participated in. And Lieutenant Dan feels almost obligated to continue that tradition. That sounds so strange that he would want to die, but he does. He does not want to be the oddball. He doesn't want to be the one who doesn't die. And he feels like his entire life has been built up to this one moment. And the opportunity finally comes for him to die, and Forrest Gump saves his life. And at first, he's angry at Forrest. He hates him. He curses his name to an extent. It just kills him. It kills him to the bone that he did not die in that war, because he feels like he's almost failed, his family. That, it was like his life duty to die. And he feels that way for several years, and he actually goes around a while in a wheelchair because he lost his legs, he lost his legs. So he spends his life in the wheelchair like you see there, sort of ignoring life almost. He's not ignoring it, but he's choosing not to embrace the fact that he lived. So he's, living on the wild side, I guess you could say. And I feel, they don't, directly address this, but I feel like it's his way of forgetting the past and his way of being able to live with, the rest of society. And then he runs into Forrest Gump again, and, through a couple of events, they become partners on a shrimp boat. And it's during this time on the boat that Lieutenant Dan realizes that he's glad he did not die. And there's a very touching moment later on in the movie where he finally realizes that, and he thanks Forrest for saving his life. And I feel like that is the most complete character arc in this movie. Now, Forrest is great, Jenny's great, but Lieutenant Dan's arc is so interesting to me and so captivating, and it's, to me, the best part of the movie. I've spent my entire review talking about the story to Forrest Gump, but really that's not what everyone talks about. The main thing they talk about are the special effects, which are groundbreaking and incredible. And I'm not going to show you pictures because you've seen them all throughout the review. It's incredible how they put Forrest Gump in front of this real footage of what happened back in, the 70s and the 80s and so forth. And I just find it so captivating they were able to do that, and the technology was groundbreaking. But, of course, I didn't want to talk about that because, well, everyone's talked about it before. And Tom Hanks is Forrest Gump. Fantastic performance. Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't even really describe it with words. So, but everyone's talked about it. So I thought I'd cover the story, which also is very good. So really, what do I think of Forrest Gump? Obviously, I think it's a fantastic film. It's one of my favorites. Not top 10, but most likely top 20. And I've seen a lot of movies. So that's saying something. And mind you, and this is something to think about as you hear me raving about it, a lot of people think this is one of the worst Best Picture winners of all time. Now, does that mean that I'm wrong or people are ignorant? No, I think that means that 1994 is truly one of the all-time greatest years for films. And with that being said, do I think Forrest Gump deserved the Best Picture Oscar? Well, we'll talk about that when I review more movies. But, of course, I'm going to give Forrest Gump a 10 out of 10. It's a fantastic film. I recommend anyone who can see it to see it if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys next time.